Let's pretend it's the end of this whole ugly story. We vanquished the foe and we triumphed in glory. There's nothing but rainbows and blue skies ahead. Hallelujah, amen, it's the end. We threw off the yoke and we broke all the shackles. We tore down the walls and we burned down the castle. The oppressors all scattered and naked they fled. Hallelujah, amen, it's the end.
Hi, and welcome to Before the Future Came, a Star Trek podcast. We're looking at the utopian ideals of Star Trek as we voyage from one work to the next following a breadcrumb trail of motifs. Last episode, we discussed Crisis Points and Crisis Points 2, which had a deep awareness of the layers of media they were playing in and a whole lot of lens flares. This month, we're talking about a film which similarly overwhelms the viewer with lens flares and references. Star Trek, the 2009 original series reboot, written by Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman and directed by J.J. Abrams. I'm Gregory, the only genius-level repeat offender in the Midwest.
I'm Melissa, and all I got left is my bones.
And I'm Lucy, and I may throw up on ya.
Melissa, you picked this month's film, so if you could, give us a summary in your own words.
Stardate, 22-33-04. On the USS Kelvin. A very strange and spiky ship comes out of a wormhole. It shoots the shit out of the Kelvin, USS Kelvin, in a very actiony scene. This ridiculously ripped captain that looks like a mix between Vin Diesel and the bad guy from Nemesis
It's
goes
Thor.
to meet... Huh?
It's Thor. It's Chris Hemsworth.
Well, he's not.
No,
captain isn't
The
Thor.
captain.
You're right.
Yes. He goes to meet Captain Nero, a Romulan with a lot of tattoos on his face, to arrange a ceasefire. Nero is looking for Spock, and when Spock is not around, he destroys the Kelvin, which had James Kirk's dad on it. George Kirk dies, but his pregnant wife makes it off the ship. We see baby James get birthed as George Kirk heroically defends the fleeing shuttles from Nero. She has that baby very quickly.
Yeah, she is
Very
in
quickly.
labor when the ship attacks.
Yes. We then cut forward, and I forgot to note the date. So, Captain's Log, Kirk is 25 years old, date. We get a series of little origin stories. We see rebellious tween Kirk joyriding an old Corvette in one of those obnoxious late-aughts sci-fi scenes where the protagonist must know 20th century music and like 20th century cars that are stick shift. Very cringe. We see a very bullied Spock get accepted into the Vulcan Science Academy, despite the disadvantage of being half human. He tells him to fuck right off, and he picks Starfleet instead. We see Uhura and adult Kirk meet at a club. The Uhura is in Starfleet at this point. A bar fight ensues, some sex ensues, and ultimately Kirk joins a shuttle of recruits and cadets the next morning after this fistfight and meets McCoy on the ship. The timelines do not line up with original Star Trek. I'm going to try not to be that jerk.
Is it that the
film.
ages are wrong?
The ages
Okay.
are wrong. The ages are wrong, yeah. But that's okay. Flash forward a bit. When Kirk is obsessing over the Kobayashi Maru, which is a no-win scenario test that Starfleet cadets are put through, Spock gets mad about it because he's been the one programming it for the last several years, but the Academy is reminded that the real world is more important when they get a distress signal from Vulcan. They round up all the cadets, throw them on board ships. This includes a bunch of cartoonish hijinks. It also includes Uhura and Spock having a femdom romantic moment in which Uhura insists she belongs on a ship, and Spock tries to act as if he was being objective by not putting her on the ship.
I did not read that as femdom.
It's sassy black lady in a way that I'll get there. So the Enterprise is super white and shiny. The lighting is pulling some cool stuff from original series. There are a ton of lens flares. Like that. This is where you realize you are going to be in Lens Flare City. So Kirk, who is not supposed to be on the Enterprise, is having a bunch of, I'll say, comical medical reactions as he runs around the ship. He realizes that what they're actually about to do is run into a Romulan trap. See above about the Kelvin. And he tells Uhura, while he's got this numb tongue, about what's happening and how something she detected is the sign of what's happening here from when he was born. Everyone eventually believes Kirk that this is happening, so they drive off to Vulcan, which is being attacked, and Nero is readying this so-called red matter, which is going to do awful things to Vulcan. Pike, who is the captain of the Enterprise at this point, heads off to meet with Nero, ultimately to be tortured by Nero. Spock is promoted to captain, and Kirk goes from first-year cadet to first officer of the Enterprise. Some more fistfights happen as Kirk and Sulu and a red shirt try to foil Nero's plans, which are, of course, to destroy Vulcan. They learn that Nero is specifically going to create a black hole at the center of Vulcan with this red matter. Spock is aware that, for some reason, a bunch of elder Vulcans sequester themselves in an old cave where they cannot be teleported or contacted, so he decides to go down directly to pull them out of the cave. He saves a few of them, but his mother dies. It's very tragic. We then see a gorgeous scene of Vulcan becoming a black hole. Or a singularity, really. It doesn't go full black hole. As is the norm in Star Trek movies, Nero's goal is to attack Earth, and Pike is tortured for various secret codes and frequencies, which he's supposed to apparently just kind of know off the dome.
I feel like that's a thing in other Star Trek stuff where, like, all Starfleet captains know certain codes to the fleet.
Yeah, it's weird. Kirk acts a fool on the bridge about some of Spock's strategic decisions and gets kicked all the way off the ship and onto Delta Vega, which, despite being the name of the planet of our unreleased pilot where no man has gone before, which is one of the original Star Trek pilots, it's not that planet. I did have to go look that up.
The location of the galaxy doesn't work out.
Right. Yeah. So, multiple Delta Vegas hanging out. Some more pointless action ensues as Kirk outruns local fauna and meets old Spock, our favorite original Spock, in an ice cave. So-called Spock Prime, conventionally. Spock Prime, who gives no shits about temporal purity and paradoxes and anything like this, mind melds with Kirk and shows him why Nero's so mad. A star went supernova and destroyed Romulus, and then everyone time-traveled into the future. Spock Prime and Kirk scoop up Scotty, and Scotty's little friend that
Scotty's little friend stays behind, but shows up at the end of the movie.
Oh, right. And they use some clever future tech of Scotty's to beam onto the Enterprise at warp. More cartoonish action goes on. Scotty manages to beam into a pipe system in engineering, and we see Kirk run around like some sort of Looney Tunes character trying to figure out how to get him out of this pipe system.
There is so much running around in this movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much. It's exhausting. It's so silly. Kirk and Spock go toe-to-toe again on the bridge with a very well-made shot of Sarek being fuzzy in the background between their angry faces while they're yelling at each other. Spock beats the shit out of Kirk's ass until Sarek calls him off. It's great. After some more interpersonal moments, the action moves right into the solar system, our solar system. Kirk and Spock go on to save the day with a bunch of different kinds of attacks on Nero's ship, including another fistfight, using the red matter. Ultimately, the red matter is what destroys Nero's ship. back on the Enterprise, Kirk offers Nero surrender, but everyone basically tells him to go to hell. So, red matter explodes, the Enterprise very narrowly escapes the event horizon. We get to see the view screen crack and all that sort of stuff. Baby Spock meets Spock Prime, who goes on a little more about some Destiny stuff, and Kirk and Spock are going to be friends and all of that. To which Baby Spock is sort of like, okay. Kirk is given an award and promoted straight to captain.
Promoted from student to captain, right? Because he had not finished the academy,
nope.
Right?
Right, and he was on academic suspension when this event popped off. Yeah. We see that Pike has received his canonical injuries that leave him using a wheelchair, which one apparently cannot be a captain and also use a wheelchair. And we end the film with Kirk and the crew taking the Enterprise out for a mission.
I didn't like this movie very much. I did not like this when I saw it in theaters. I don't think I've seen it since. And I feel like I dislike different things about it this time. But also a lot of the same things.
I remember liking it a lot better when I originally saw it than I liked it this time, which was not at all.
I think this is the first time we've watched something actually that I think was just bad for the show.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Yeah. I think I had hoped... You know how people feel differently about the Star Wars prequels now, for some reason?
Or the Matrix sequels.
Or the Matrix sequels. I'd wondered if coming back to this now, I would have a different sort of feeling about it. But I don't. I don't like it. It's bad. There are things that are worse than even I realized at the time. So I did apologize before assigning this. So
I feel like if you apologize before doing something, it does not count.
Oh, well then okay, I'm sorry.
I think you have to. I think it needs to be remorse, not premorse.
Well, I did know it was bad. I just didn't realize how long it was going to feel to be watching it and taking notes at the same
I had
time.
to stop it multiple times, and I stopped it to do laundry, and I hate laundry. I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the things, and we've each brought a topic for discussion. Mine is the vilification of labor. And I want to talk about this topic because although I hated many, many things about this movie, I think the thing that really strikes me at my core is Nero and the representation of Nero as basically a worker, right? He's a miner.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a dude. And then they make him into this really, really heinous bad guy. And I really struggle with that idea of the juxtaposition of this sort of, what he would see himself out, right? If this was Nero's story, he would see himself as sort of a working class hero, right? Getting retribution for this terrible thing, or maybe even stopping a terrible thing from happening to his people, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that's not the story that we get. And I'm going to say the petty thing first. So the petty thing is that Nero is cursed because he is played by Eric Bana, who you may recall from being the bad Hulk, Bruce Banner.
Oh, no.
He is also the lead character in The Time Traveler's Wife, another cursed role. So I do think casting Eric Bana was an immediate problem. But that's just my petty thing.
I think he's a fine actor. I think the actor did a good job. It's just a badly written role.
I can neither agree nor disagree with you, as I've never seen Eric Bana in a role that I think was good. So, so I think to really understand the problem, I would like to start by talking about an entirely different IP, which is the original Spider-Man Homecoming movie, which I am about to spoil, so spoilers here. This is the Marvel Spider-Man, and in this movie, the villain is Vulture. And it's extremely clever because this version of Vulture is basically cleaning up the city after all of the terrible things that happened to the city after that big Avengers movie, when the city's destroyed, right? Vulture is one of the guys who's cleaning up the city, right? He's a worker cleaning up the city. And he's picking up the trash, the detritus, and he is told to stop because, you know, Tony Stark's people are like, oh no, we want this tech. You can't do this. You can't be profiting from, you know, this. We need to gather all of this tech. And that's what turns him into the Vulture, because he was just trying to make a living, right? And take care of his family. And he becomes the Vulture in order to take the tech and make money off of it. And Vulture in that movie, I mean, he is the villain, right? And you see him as the villain. He is killing people and he is villainous. However, he's also understandable, right? And he is in that movie juxtaposed with Stark, who is a rich guy and a hero. But the hero who goes against him is Spider-Man, who's your working class hero, right? The problem, if we compare, so I think it worked, is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say, I think it's fine. I think you can make a working class dude a villain, and it can be successful, and you don't have to do it in a way that feels like you're taking a shot at working class people. I think you can do that, and I think Spider-Man Homecoming does it successfully. I think this movie does all of those things incorrectly, right? Because we have this guy who is a villain who, if we stopped and thought about it for even 30 seconds, you're like, oh, this is really relatable, right? Like, this dude's just really just trying to save his people. I'm not saying he's not villainous, but he is relatable. But the movie doesn't give you any of that. Like, it doesn't give you anything to hang on to in terms of feeling that kind of sympathy in the way that they do with Vulture so successfully in that Spider-Man movie. And then when you see who our hero is in this movie, it's the military, right? It's Starfleet. All right. I mean, that's a problem, right? That is, to me, that is a problem of meaning, because when your guy who's just a working class guy, a miner, what does he say? He says, a life of honest labor. I chose a life of honest labor. This is the guy we have up against Kirk, who's crashing his stepdad's Corvette into a ditch. And even Spock, who is so privileged, right? He has two choices. He could go to the academy or he can go into Starfleet. And these are the dudes who are up against Nero, and it chafes me, y'all. It chafes me. So go ahead, Gregory. I'm sorry.
In Kirk's backstory, when he talks to Pike gives him the, like, why are you wasting your time in Iowa talk. Like, Starfleet's so much better than anything you could do in Iowa, which seems to be, you know, farming, producing food for people. Like, I mean, obviously Kirk's a washout, but, like, Pike's very clearly like, this is a trash life of people who live here. You want a good life, which is being in the military and serving Starfleet.
Yeah.
What does he call it? He says it's a peacekeeping and humanitarian armada, which is
peacekeeper.
A fascinating
a
phrase.
Term.
Yes.
And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that in the real world, the military basically takes advantage of poor and working class people, right? That's who they try and enlist into the military to pay for college. That's the argument that they make. The recruiters say, hey, come and do your years in the military and then your college will be paid for. So who are they taking advantage of? And that's poor and working class people. So to have that version of Starfleet in this movie, I think that is a problem.
I do have one tiny little drop of compliment for the film, and I'll talk more about Nero in my segment, but I really like that Nero just refers to people by their first name. Like, Pike is like, I'm Captain Christopher Pike of the Enterprise. And Nero says, hi, Christopher, I'm Nero. And keeps calling him Christopher throughout the thing. And it's like, it might be a Romulans have single names like Vulcans thing, but I prefer to think that it's Nero's like, I don't care about your rank. We're equal. We're equivalent people.
I really like that. I think that's a great observation. And I think if that were something that had something else to hang on to in the movie, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, there are two things that come to mind here. One is that Star Trek has always tried to dodge that association between military and class by not really having enlisted ranks. Yes. Not really.
It's got one enlisted officer.
Yeoman.
It's got one. O'Brien is the only enlisted person in all of Starfleet, apparently.
No. Yeomen are enlisted. So all the people that give Kirk things to sign in original series, they're all enlisted, I'm pretty sure. And you meet Janice Rand. There are some named ones in earlier Star Trek. But this is a dance that they try to do, and I doubt it's conscious. I doubt they are going, let's separate the problems of class and military. Maybe Roddenberry was cool like that, but I doubt it. But yes, that comes to mind. And then on sort of Nero as a villain, and maybe we'll get to this also later, is that like Nero could have come through and prevented whether Spock is actually responsible for this is a whole nother thing, Spock Prime, but he could have come through and just murdered Spock. And instead, he went to genocide, right?
I'm going to go into all of this in my topic.
Yeah. So, if we're talking about vilifying a working class person, like, why did he do this, right? And ultimately, like, it's a matter of, this is an action movie. These Star Trek films always have huge stakes in them. There's shades of other Star Trek films here that they're pulling from and they're echoes of. So, but yeah, going to destroy Vulcan as the mixture of revenge and preventing this later supernova.
So I think that's actually really significant, Melissa. I think that's a great point because he says it's because he wants Spock to feel the same way he did, right?
I've got a whole thing on character motivations that I am going to cover.
Well, but I want to say that I do think that fits in with this idea about working class people and this sort of dichotomy this movie is drawing between like sort of feeling and rationality, right? Mm-hmm. Like that these miners somehow, they aren't scientific and rational in the way that Spock and the Vulcan scientists are. And I think that's a really false dichotomy that is drawn in the film. And I think that being, and I know you're going to get more into that, but I think that being part of Nero's motivation is a real problem for the movie in many ways.
Yeah, we see a lot of evidence that labor has occurred. We've got this mining ship, this huge ship that's really scary, but could theoretically look like that because it's meant to like chomp on asteroids. We see like the Enterprise being built. We see like Kirk tossing the keys to his bike to a construction worker maybe as he's on his way to leave. But like the closest thing to like a speaking role for a laborer other than Nero and his men is Scotty's little dude. Who, it's I mean, Scotty treats that guy like a pet, but that guy's clearly a sapient being, although he doesn't get a uniform. I don't know what that guy's deal is.
You get shades of the sort of the Shakespearean clowns if they weren't as clever as the Shakespearean clowns, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for indulging my absolute hatred of this sort of class warfare that film sometimes engages in.
So, speaking of clowns, let's talk about how this film treats women.
Oh no.
This film let me put a little caveat here and say, I know that this film series gets better with regards to its treatment of women, but I'm going to talk about this film. And that is that there are very few women in this film, and they are all centered on the men that they are adjacent to. The women we have are Uhura, we have Amanda, Spock's mother, we have Winona, who is Kirk's mother, and we have Gayla, who is the Orion cadet that we see Kirk having an encounter with early in the film, a sexual encounter. We hear Chapel mentioned, we don't see her on screen. It is tough to watch Uhura in this film. It is real tough.
Yeah.
Not only is she primarily a girlfriend, when she does demonstrate her skill set, which is intercepting a Klingon transmission and doing some decoding of things, even that expertise is mostly filtered through Kirk. It is Kirk who reports her findings and gets people to believe his argument using her findings, which she then says, yep, that's what I heard. She's very bossy as a girlfriend. This whole scene in which she wanted to be on the Enterprise, Spock says, I don't have the exact quote, but he's like, well, I didn't want to appear biased by putting you on the flagship. And she says, no, I'm assigned to the flagship. Which, on the one hand, yeah, fuck you, Spock. On the other hand, what are we doing? What is this conversation that's happening in the middle of a crisis in which this is the dynamic? She could have just gone on the ship. She could have, anyway. And yet, she spends the rest of the movie being very compassionate, hands on face, follow Spock into the turbo lift.
It's frustrating because, if she had, any other role in the film, I kind of like the Uhura Spock thing. Their relationship is really interesting. The way she's like, what do you need? And, lets him, gives him his space, and, helps him when he's being emotional. I mean, he never shows any compassion towards her, I don't think. But,
yeah.
She's cool. She seems like a cool girlfriend.
Yeah. I think, Alex Kurtzman is working his way through how to handle Spock in romantic relationships, right? Because Kurtzman is the showrunner of almost every modern Star Trek now. Yeah. And so we see this done much better in later Star Treks. So this movie feels like, part of me was like, okay, this is weirdly interstitial, right? This is between the last Star Trek Next Generation films, and it is before modern Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interstitial between, let's say, original series and whatever this new thing is going to be, what the sequels are, ultimately. But it's not even that. Even in original series, we see women be people more than they are in this film. And it's really, really tough to watch. And it strikes me as being so written by men. Everything is so centered on the masculinity of these people.
The scene where, Uhura and, what's the Orion woman's name?
Gayla, I think.
Gayla and Uhura are roommates. And Kirk is making out with Gayla on top of her bed. She's in her underwear. He hides under the bed when Uhura comes in. Uhura comes in, and while having a conversation, strips down to her underwear, which I'm not a woman. I don't know how college-age women act. That seems weird. Do you come in, your roommates in their underwear, and you just kind of undress?
On that scene, the note that I have written is, I have rarely seen more spectacular failures of the Bechdel test than that scene. You really,
it's so wild.
Not only do you have these two women talking to each other in their underwear, while a man literally is a voyeur under the bed, they are still talking about men. It's almost like they were like, oh, how can we best fail the Bechdel test? What could we do to make sure that everyone knows we are failing this fucking test?
And Kirk is such a creep in this film.
Oh
Like,
my
he's
God,
immediately,
yes.
so he's hitting on Uhura at that bar in the before he joins Starfleet. She's clearly not interested in him. She is like ordering drinks for her group to take back to them. She blows him off. He insists on getting her first name, right? That's his little cute thing he does. He asks her first name. And then doesn't get it. Joins Starfleet, knows Uhura's in Starfleet, knows her roommate, right? Because that's, you know who the roommate of the person you're fucking is. Still doesn't find out her last name, even though he could just, like, look it up on Facebook or in the college directory or whatever. He doesn't find out Uhura's first name. Yeah, he doesn't know her first name until Spock tells him, or Spock mentions it, like, near the end of the film. It is wild how much Kirk is clearly just using the first name thing as a way to, like, exert power in a weird, like, pickup artist way. Like, it's not negging, but
it's also
weird.
I think it also demonstrates what Lissa's talking about, how centered it is on men, right? Like, that we can't even hear her first name until Spock speaks it talking to her. Like, that is so centering of male experience, right?
Right. So they're also doing a thing, and this kind of thing is part of why I picked this film, chaining off of the last episodes that we did, is they're also doing a thing about the fact that Uhura didn't have a first name in original series, right? But instead of, like, doing anything interesting with that, they have let it become this male-centered, flirty thing where, like, in that original bar scene, it's not even that she was turning him down in a flirty way. Like, there was no, like, she was not interested.
Yeah, it was talk to the hand.
And talk to the hand. And instead, they took this thing that was this, okay, let's pull this little reference forward from original series. And, you know, Sulu immediately gets a first name, who also did not have a first name in the original series. He is immediately announced as Hikaru Sulu, and Uhura becomes a whole thing throughout the film. It is weird, and it's bad.
It is weird and bad.
And it's 2009 when this film comes out. This film was probably written in 2007. Like, there's no reason for any science fiction to be this ass backwards on gender, period. Next Gen is done. It's been out. Crusher has crashed the ship. You know, like, why are we doing this?
Speaking of marginalized people, because I don't know that this will come up in the rest of our discussions, Sulu specifically, Sulu's a fencer. There's a whole scene, there's a scene where it's like, oh, he's going to be able to use his fencing in an action scene. That's cool, because that's established in the canon. In original series, and this is bad because it's different. It's bad because it's racist. In the original series, he fences with a foil. In this, he pulls out a really cool folding katana, which he then doesn't use in a particularly Japanese martial style. Like, he doesn't actually do martial arts with it. Like, there's the way that you use a katana, there are a bunch of different ways you use a katana, but, you know, a lot of them have very powerful overhead strokes. Some of them are striking kind of when drawing from the sheath. There are a few others, but none of them are kind of the swashbuckling approach. So, like, they gave him a Japanese sword because he's Japanese, a Japanese character, and then didn't do any further research on, like, how someone would use said sword. Appalling.
Right. It would have been a different thing, bad, but also maybe funny, if they had him do fencing moves with a katana.
Yeah, like, they could have, right? They could have had him do saber fighting, right? Because sabers are a fencing sword, and it's just like, oh, he's using a katana-like saber. Okay, sure. But that's not what happens. So,
like I said, I know that this series does get at least somewhat better, although I do have memories of Uhura remaining kind of a naggy character. But her competence with Klingon as a language becomes like a major point, I think, in one of the later films.
I remember really liking Beyond, but I don't know if it would hold up if I saw it now.
it would have to hold up better than this.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing I couldn't help but notice about Uhura was that her hairstyling and her ponytail, I thought it was so Western, right? It was a really white hairstyle for her. And I think especially since, we've watched a lot of Strange New Worlds lately, and I think that version of Uhura just feels so much more, I don't know, good.
Yeah.
Feels good. And Uhura in the movies, in the original series movies, also migrates to a fro, I'm pretty sure.
I think you're right.
And, it's the 70s or whatever, so one must. But this, the glitz and glam of this movie, the very bright colors, the sharpness of the colors, I'll get into the lens flares later, but the brightness of this film contributes to a certain degree of sterileness that her very straightened hair, very long hair, both of which are like a particular kind of fixation, does fit with that in a way that is unappealing. Everyone is a cheerleader. Everyone is pop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's right in line with that. The swinging ponytail and hands-on boyfriend all the time. Anyway, I think this was hard to watch on that front, especially having seen, we talked about the first episode of Discovery, where Giorgio and Michael Burnham just are two human beings.
Yeah,
first line passes the Bechdel test.
It rocked so hard. I struggled as well. It was really hard to watch this version of Uhura specifically. I mean, I think we've just seen... even Nichelle Nichols' version of Uhura, I think, is better than this.
Yeah.
I thought this was...
more to say.
Yeah.
She's so sidelined in such a... It felt such a gendered thing, It felt bad. It felt bad to watch.
It's one of those things where, you look at the current set of Star Treks, and, they are not entirely reactive works. They're not looking at this film and going, God, we don't want to be that. But maybe also they kind of are a little bit. Maybe they're kind of oh, look what we did 15 years ago. Let's not do that. Or I guess it would have been 10 years ago at that point. But it is a very sharp contrast. So, yeah. And the poor moms. One of them murdered. One of them only for the birthing. Only for the birthing.
I don't know that it will come up any other time, but I do love me some Winona Ryder. So I'm always glad to see her.
Was that the mom?
Spock's mom is Winona Ryder.
I did not recognize her at all.
If that baby is half Roxy Carmichael, it has at least half a chance. I'd know her anywhere. I could see her face. I love Winona Ryder.
So we talked a little bit about how it kind of feels like Uhura's first name is held as just a way to get to a plot beat or to a little joke. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of characters in this film do things as if they're characters who know the story of Star Trek and know that they have to do things in order to make Star Trek happen. And none of the characters' motivations really makes... Well, I don't want to say none. A lot of the characters' motivations don't make sense to me. And we talked about Nero earlier, and I think we can return to that. Nero was a miner. He heard that his planet was going to be destroyed, right? A supernova was happening with some amount of time to stop it. A Vulcan ambassador scientist, it's unclear why Spock, in his old role, he's an ambassador now, he's not a scientist, but he comes up with this red matter thing that can save Romulus, and he's too late to save Romulus. If Spock had not come there, Romulus would have been destroyed too. So Spock is not at all culpable for the destruction of Romulus. fine.
Right.
Nero sees his planet destroyed. He's very distraught. He attacks Spock. They get in a fight. They go through the wormhole. Nero is like immediately like sees a Federation ship, immediately asks after Spock, attacks it. This all like kind of makes sense, right? He's overcome by grief. He isn't thinking straight. Then 25 years pass. Like
Yeah.
Nero the miner, who and his crew of laborers, right? These are Romulans. They're culturally different, but they're not maniacs when they start, right? But like I think we're just supposed to think that like Nero has been driven insane with grief for again 25 years.
It's a long time.
And like in the original script, they get sent to a Klingon penal colony, which is why there's that attack on Klingons that is completely unclear why it happens.
Oh,
and so like that's at least an explanation. Yeah, that's at least an explanation for like what they were doing for 25 years instead of just other than just waiting for Spock. But like if your planet was destroyed 25 years ago, at some point there you go, you know, I'm not sure that Spock could have done anything. Possibly you go, hey, maybe I should call Romulus and let them know that their star will explode on this specific date and that they should do something about it or evacuate, right? Like, or maybe I should just show up to Romulus, give them this fancy ship, and help them conquer the galaxy. Like,
yep.
Instead, he wants to get revenge on Spock. Fine. He wants to have Spock feel his pain. Fine. The way he does that is by committing genocide, destroying an entire planet at great personal risk, and then going on to be like, oh, I also want to destroy Earth, his other home?
Wild.
Like, this is
he wants a Romulus free of the Federation. So instead of going to Romulus and setting them free of the Federation, he goes to destroy Earth.
Yeah, and he does all these things in ways that will not at all prevent the destruction of the planet. And like, again, if this was happening in the week following the destruction of Romulus, that makes sense, right? I can believe that someone is just like so distraught and so, you know, running on caffeine and grief and anger and rage that you're just going to want to strike out and have revenge on everyone. But like, you cannot operate on that level of stress for 25 years with your intense Romulan emotions, right? Because Romulans and Vulcans have overwhelming emotions. It just doesn't work. You can't do that.
Right.
And
I also admire that they were able to like be so focused in all of that grief. Like that's not my experience with grief.
Like, they're overwhelmed with grief, but also able to maintain very careful plans, including being able to somehow calculate when Spock is going to emerge from the time travel singularity, even though they don't know when he went in. And, like, let's compare this with a very similar villain from Star Trek. The villain of Prodigy, which I've only seen the first season, so there might be details in the second season I'm leaving out. But the villain of Prodigy primarily is the Diviner. And he's this alien bad dad who the Federation came to minor spoilers for Prodigy. None of these are big reveals, but this is where I'm talking about character motivations that are revealed over the course of the season. The Diviner's culture was, you know, the Federation came, made first contact, and he feels that they caused a civil war on his planet that resulted in essentially his planet dying, like destroying itself. And so he is angry at the Federation, and along with 99 of his compatriots, is sent back in time to deal with this. And his primary motivation throughout all of this is to stop first contact on his planet. He wants to prevent the Federation from ever interacting with his planet. So, first of all, the Diviner has a plan that actually will help, right? Like, his motivations are like Nero wants to destroy the Federation, but the Diviner does it because the Federation's very existence is a threat to his planet, as opposed to previously where the Federation and their red matter technology is the solution to saving Romulus. The Diviner changes over the course of his time in the past. The Diviner, like, starts out furious in some way, and like that shifts to the simmering resentment. He makes compromises. His entire life is taken over by this effort. He actually like does multiple things to try and affect this. He captures a ship. He prepares a virus to distribute. Like, he does a bunch of steps, and it's not like he is revenge is part of his motivation, but he has had time to think over how to have his revenge in the best way possible, and he carries out that plan. As opposed to Nero, who seems to be first thought, best thought for 25 years. And it's frustrating because so many characters do things to make the movie happen, which I don't mind coincidences in films. I don't mind characters making one of several reasonable decisions to make something happen, but like Spock maroons Kirk on a planet in violation of regulations. Instead of like throwing him in the brig, he puts him in an escape pod and launches him to a planet, because that planet, unbeknownst to anyone, is the planet where old Spock and Scotty are. And that's the reason why he's marooned there, is so he can run into old Spock. But that doesn't make sense as a character motivation for young Spock. And this is rife throughout. Like, all of the major decisions that drive the plot, Kirk or Pike assigning Kirk to be his first officer. Why? Because
Nonsense.
Kirk needs to end up as the captain. But Pike doesn't know that. Pike has met this kid once, as far as we know. Mm-hmm. He met him in a bar where he had just gotten beaten because he was an awful creep to a cadet. Convinced him to join Starfleet. Years later, runs into this dude and is like, "You stowed away on my ship, and you were right about one thing, so you get to be my first officer." It's
Yep.
The characters here aren't characters, they're cardboard standees of original series characters, and it's so frustrating.
It is.
I feel like I ranted there.
Do you feel better?
No. I want to say more good things about this film. There's some things I like about this film that we'll presumably get into, but it's really hard not to get angry thinking about this film, because I care about Star Trek. Alright, so those are the main topics covered. So now it's lightning round time. What other interesting things did we spot?
I want to talk a little bit about Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about it from two angles. One of them is what we've sort of already touched on a decent amount, which is sort of this canonicity. Where do we expect things to end up? Because we are familiar with Star Trek when we watch this film. And we maybe have some questions about to what degree J.J. Abrams is familiar with Star Trek in watching this film. And then I also want to talk about the in-world sense of Destiny, which is my least favorite thing when it comes up in Star Trek. I would rather things be about connection than be about destiny in Star Trek. And we can fight over that. But, we watch this, and we have this happen when we started watching modern Star Trek as well.
Discovery,
especially the ones set in the past. Yeah. Exactly. We're looking back and we're like, oh, how are they going to fit Burnham into the fact that, she's Spock's sister, and, are Spock and whichever Kirk going to become friends, and is Pike going to end up in a wheelchair, right? Like, all of these things that we're looking for, like, how is this going to align with what we know of canon? And touching on, like, Greg, what you were saying about the character motivations, this film is just hurtling, just full tilt warp speed. Can we get to something the viewer recognizes as the destinies of these characters? And it doesn't even seem to understand what those are the same way we as viewers and geeky fans of Star Trek do, where we look at this and we're like, how is this friendship developing? Kirk Kirk stood in Spock's face, extremely close, and mocked him for feeling bad about a genocide and his dead mom. I'll tell you who can't be my fucking friend after that. Right?
Yeah.
What is...
That's one of the few character motivations I understand, right? Like, the reason Kirk is so mean is because he is trying to achieve a thing. But, like, why do you make up after that?
Right.
Also,
That's
Spock beat you.
horrendous.
The things that Kirk knows about Spock are, made an unfair test, tried to drum him out of Starfleet, begrudgingly said he was correct about a thing, beat him to within an inch of his life, and then got in a fist fight as an ally.
And then came from the future and said
and
you're going to be
abandoned him.
best friends.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Right. So, yeah, this movie feels so confused. And we have seen Star Trek films, I guess not on this show other than First Contact. We have seen Star Trek films want to be action films and do so very shakily, right? This is a problem, a thing that happens in Star Trek films. This went action first.
Yeah.
In a way that results in this tangle.
There's a lot of action in Star Trek, right? Like, Star Trek has always had fist bar fights and space battles and so on, but it didn't feel like this where the movie exists to take you from set-piece action scene to set-piece action scene.
Right. And I do think the movie feels different, even at the time watching it. And now looking back, now that we have some shows running under our belts now, there is a difference between watching what feels like could be a one-off film versus actual having real showrunners holding the Bibles in their hand, making new Star Trek, right? It doesn't feel like 2009 made canon. Yeah. It does feel like Discovery did. Like, Discovery folks had the right to. 2009 did not.
And we talked about how the Discovery premiere has all these action scenes that we enjoyed, or at least I enjoyed. And it's because all of those action scenes were in service of the story rather than the other way around.
Right. And then to sort of move it in character here, we have our old gentleman Spock, our favorite Leonard Nimoy, who is just looking his age. He's literally talking about destiny and talking about, I'll say predetermination. Maybe it's just determination. I don't know that I could distinguish the official schools of philosophy, but he's like, this friendship is going to happen. This, I am making room for it to happen. I'm facilitating it. You'll kiss and make up. But this friendship is predicated on the series of events that gets him and, I'll say, Kirk Prime into the space they're in. And just having Kirk be a captain and Spock be a first officer is insufficient. Well, I mean, this series is going to show us it is sufficient, but from a how did we get here standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. And I am amused. I very much related to Kirk when Spock is talking about this to Kirk, and Spock or Kirk kind of rolls his eyes a little bit. He's like, okay, but actually, can we talk about what's happening? It has nothing to do with this friendship business. They've set Spock Prime up very much in contrast with these kids, right? Like Spock, he's got very soft lighting on him. He's got this wise old man voice. He's all like adorably bundled up in the cold, and Kirk is, running around, cuts all over his face and stubble, and this very earth living, bright person. And it feels like this massive disconnect, and it feels like the disconnect of the rest of the film. It feels like there's a stodgy thing saying, destiny, how are we going to get to the friendship? And then we have the rest of the film that's like, I gotta punch someone in the face, and we're gonna punch each other in the face. There's our friendship. And it's rough. It is, I will take Strange New Worlds talking about destiny over this disjointed people talking past each other about destiny.
Well, it really, the movie seemed to only have 3 modes, which is either violence, like we're having a fight scene, or an action scene, or there's just straight up exposition where somebody is literally just explaining some really dense plot points like Leonard Nimoy did in that part with him, or there's quippy dialogue that actually is not communicating anything meaningful about the characters to each other. So those are kind of the three modes that exist in this movie.
Yeah, even Sarek and Spock's touching little moment that they have where Sarek is saying, like, yes, you have two paths, as we discussed 25 years ago. You can choose to be human or not, and you should embrace your emotions, because they're there. And I married your mother because I loved her, which every Sarek at some point must admit. It falls flat. For one, not my favorite Sarek actor. He's fine, but not my favorite.
Yeah, he doesn't get a lot to say or do.
No. You would think he's the one whose spouse died.
Yeah, maybe he's, got an opinion on that, but...
And I know if Winona Ryder was my wife, I would be able to communicate some level of affection for her.
Right. But even that interpersonal moment falls flat, where we have seen in other Star Treks Sarek be a very, very good, emoter with his children. And it just... They can't even pull off that mode because it's either got to be quippy or it's got to be exposition. And it turns into exposition. I married your mother because... It's just a mess. It feels like the movie needs to, like, settle the fuck down. Like, it's like a young child running around. You're like, hey, cool it. Take 2 breaths. Relax. You might get somewhere here. That's it. That's it on Destiny.
All right.
I hate Destiny and Star Trek.
Let's have a palate cleanser, because this one, I think, will be less of a rant and an actual discussion of Star Trek. So, this film does the Kobayashi Maru, which is, I think, one of the cool little, details of Star Trek that is returned to repeatedly. So, Kobayashi Maru is an exam or a simulation that people get, that Starfleet Academy students run through. And they're cast in the role of bridge crew on a ship that the Kobayashi Maru is the civilian transport, right? So
I think so.
There's a civilian transport in trouble that's being threatened in this case by Klingons. Who the roles are, like what species it is, changes in Star Trek era, but the students are tasked with rescuing the crew of this ship and surviving this attack by a bunch of enemy ships. And the whole point of the Kobayashi Maru is it's designed to be unwinnable. Like, something will always happen that will cause you to fail and your ship to get blown up. And the way it's always explained is that it's a test to get captains comfortable, or at least introduced to the idea that sometimes it might be an unwinnable situation and they'll have to make difficult decisions. And it's been established that Kirk cheated at it because he doesn't believe in no-win scenarios, and so he kind of hacked the test in order to make it so that he could win. And the way that people approach the Kobayashi Maru and the way that characters kind of frame their loss or success at it is different in from show to show, and it really reveals, I think, things about the show. So we get sometimes the Kobayashi Maru exists to teach you that you will have to make sacrifices, right? In order to succeed, you'll have to give up people, you have to send people into danger, or you'll have to sacrifice your own ship in order to protect other people. In the case of it runs, there's a Prodigy episode where Dahl goes through the Kobayashi Maru, and he almost solves it. He does this really wild, very un-Starfleet approach that actually, if he hadn't fucked up at the end randomly, he would have succeeded at the scenario. And that's interesting because that's saying, well, the Kobayashi Maru is only no-win if you're thinking like a Starfleet officer. If you're thinking like a child, you're able to figure it out.
A child who broke out of prison.
Yes, yeah, a very smart child who's good at dealing with impossible problems. And the way I imagine, as described in, I think it's introduced in The Wrath of Khan, the Star Trek 2. The way I imagine Kirk breaking the Kobayashi Maru, because I don't think it's depicted there, is he very quietly hacks the system to like adjust a few variables and then comes out looking cool, right? Because part of Kirk's like whole character, like this movie very much reduces Kirk to a two-dimensional philanderer, like reckless, rebellious philanderer. But like Kirk has always at least been a little showboaty, right? He always wants to come up with a clever solution. And like, I imagine that Kirk hacked the thing and then like played it straight. And it was only discovered long after the fact that he cheated, right? That it was this like discovery and this scandal. But in this case, Kirk doesn't have to take this test, right? He's already taken the Kobayashi Maru. So he volunteers to take it again. Hacks it in a way that like turns off all the lights and is very flippant. He's eating an apple, just kind of kicking back, pretending that this test is nothing, and solves it by basically magic, right? Like the way he solves it is like, oh, the Klingons don't have shields anymore. And that feels like, I mean, again, why did you think that would work? Like, why does this accomplish your goals? Like, this is just... in this case, he only hacks the Kobayashi Maru, and this is a different Kirk than the Wrath of Khan Kirk. But in this case, he only hacks it just to say "fuck you," and gets in trouble for it, even though this was a voluntary retake of the test, and also obviously wasn't deceitful about it, right? He's just like, "Yes, I hacked your test," and I don't know what this show is saying about no-win scenarios. I guess the show is saying, if you're flippant enough, you can just trust that things will work out, and you'll end up captain when you cheat openly. I don't know. I don't know what the Kobayashi Maru exists for in this story.
A thing I was curious about in that part is we find that Spock designed the test. Is that true in any other versions of Star Trek?
I'm not
Well, I think he had been... I don't know that he originated it. I think he had been programming it these years in which he was stationed at the academy.
Yeah, he wrote the test the past 4 years, he didn't invent the Kobayashi Maru.
Because it seemed to me like sort of a way to spotlight Spock as being this sort of test creator, I don't know, assessment creator, and Kirk being a bad boy, right? Like, I'm not sure this movie had greater designs than that.
Yeah, so when I first saw this movie, 2009, I was a fairly recent college grad, and when they said that this was the third time Kirk had taken that test, and he had a real fuck it vibe about it, it made me think of the way students take SATs and the GRE. Where I took the SAT 2 times, 3 times, right? And by the time I was, look, look, high school was a lot. And, by the time you've taken it your 3rd time, you're not flippant. It matters to you, obviously, right? You're doing it that many times and you want that perfect number. But there is a certain degree of detachment. Like, by the time I took that test the 2nd time and left the room, I couldn't have told you anything that was on it, right? But I had the formulas, right? Like, it was like ingrained in my head. And his attachment to retaking that test to get a certain outcome, but also only sort of caring about the results. Like, my first SAT test would have gotten me into the same school I got into anyway, right? I didn't have to take it again and again. And he didn't have to take the Kobayashi Maru again and again. And, there's a person I went to college with who, like, tested through a bunch of classes in a way that wasn't normal to be able to do at that school. And it was like, why are you doing this? Like, I don't know, this sort of test frenzy that is part of American culture and in academic spaces, or, student spaces, kind of seemed to be part of that, where Spock, who could get into the VSA, who had his choices, right, of the two paths, one of them being very academic focused, was the writer of this test. It kind of seemed to be in that space to me. I am far removed from the weird little brain who would take the SAT 3 times, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird stuff.
I think that if he cared about his grade, that he would pass the test in a way that didn't make it immediately obvious that he had cheated.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, you want to know what's funny? Humor's funny.
Is humor funny?
Well.
Oh no.
So, I'm an English professor, and sometimes I teach Shakespeare, and whenever you teach Shakespeare, you have to deal with the concept of comedy. And, because, you have tragedies and comedies. And it's, Shakespearean tragedies are a good example of something that, just stands the test of time. People still understand what it is like to be ambitious. People understand what it is like to be jealous. People understand what it's like to be an old man who's worried about his children and the future of his land or whatever. But the comedies are a little trickier because although some of the themes of those texts are still resonant in many ways, I really like a lot of the comedies. The things that are actually funny, the jokes, don't always make it, right? Like, they're not always funny today because we don't have the same context for that humor for it to be funny. So you often have to explain a whole lot to students, for them to be able to get the joke. And then, of course, it's not funny anymore because you've explained a whole bunch. And I always tell my students, it's really similar to if you just watch an episode of, like, The Daily Show from 10 years ago, you're going to have the same experience of reading a Shakespearean comedy, right? The humor is not going to be funny because it's so contextual. It's so based on that specific time and space, that sort of moment. Comedy is so driven by that sort of kairos, right? And I think this movie really suffers from that reality about comedy. I did think there were several funny moments. My favorite funny part was probably the Vulcan bullies when they come up to Spock when he's a little kid at the school. And one of them says, says something to him, and he says, "I assume you have prepared new insults for today." Like, I think that scene is hilarious. Because
I love the idea of Vulcan bullies carefully crafting the insults that they think will make their target feel bad. Like, I don't know, it's adorable. I mean, awful, but adorable.
Yeah, and it takes place, of course, in the Vulcan version of Holes. So, like, it's great. Like, this is super scene. I think Kirk, to me, in his that first moment in the bar is very funny when the guys come up to him to be bullies, and he's like, "Oh yeah, go get a few more guys, and it'll be a fair fight. It's already 4 against 1." Like, that's funny. I thought that was funny. But so much of this movie, especially Kirk, I think he is the worst. Spock a little bit too, though. It's just a sort of misogynist humor. That scene in the bar, another part of the humor is that I'll quote unquote accidentally, he plunges into Uhura and grabs her boobs. And it's clearly meant for humor in the movie, right? It's supposed to be funny. And I was just, my 2024 self was like, wow, that's terrible. Like, because he does it, his reaction is not, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." His reaction is, "Hey, I touched her boobs." And it's so gross, right? Yeah. Like, it's appalling to me to watch. And it is the sort of way this movie operates. Him hiding under the bed and being a voyeur, like, the movie's playing that for funny. Like, haha, look at Kirk. Isn't he a bad boy? And it's, it's terrible. It's terrible for Uhura.
Yeah, and they're also doing things about the red shirts not being intelligent as a funny thing, right? The guy won't open his parachute. There's the cupcake guy. Like, they're doing these, like, dumb meathead, quote-unquote, ableist things, right? And those are played for laughs. Those are totally supposed to be funny. I mean, the reference of cupcake again later is funny.
Yeah.
That guy being not smart
It's
is
not
played
funny.
for laughs
Yeah,
too, and that's not funny.
exactly. And another thing that I really struggled with in this movie was Chekhov's accent, which is in this movie played to be so hilarious. And it's interesting because I do think there is a little bit of humor that's played in the old movies with Chekhov's accent. I know the whale movie.
Nuclear Wessels.
Yeah. And I guess that's where they were coming from with this, but it's not funny.
Yeah.
It feels so like US centric, right? It's so bizarre to think here we are in Starfleet. Surely, like, why are we flipping out about this, right? Like, it feels so, I don't know, old fashioned.
And it doesn't make sense because, God, I am the pedantic asshole. If I voice record a fucking password, it's got a voice match. So he
the
would
computer
have said
should
it.
understand him.
Yeah, it's his fucking voice print. Why would he have typed in Victor and then not recorded? You know what I mean? Like, it just makes no sense. It's just for laughs.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't make sense.
And part of the humor there is that reference back to the old stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that are clearly meant to be jokey references here, but they're not. Yeah. They're not implemented properly. Like there's a damn it, I'm not a doctor, I'm a whatever. But it's just sort of thrown out there. Like, it's just sort of said not in the context that it would have been said in the show. And so it doesn't land as a joke for me. Like, I don't go, oh, he said the thing. I go like, why did he say the thing? Has he seen Star Trek and so he knows that he's supposed to say the Bones line? Ugh.
Yeah.
The bizarre experience in watching the movie was being like, because it felt to me like they were playing so much of the movie for laughs, but it was either something that kind of felt really gross in 2024, or so much of it was this weird slapstick, you know, when Kirk's fingers swole up, and I was just like, why are we doing this? It's so stupid. Like, it's just, and there's no reason for it. It's not funny, and it's also nonsensical in this bizarro way. So it was just looking at the comedy of this film, I don't know if it was funny in 2009. I can't speak to that. I can't remember.
I'm shaking my head no.
I feel like I liked it better when I saw it in 2009 than I did when I saw it a couple days ago. But it's not funny. I mean, I guess you could just watch that one scene with the Vulcan children and you probably have seen the funniest thing in the movie. I
did like, in the awful bar scene where Kirk is hitting on Uhura, there's the person stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's cute.
That is a classic, always funny bit of someone sitting very still in an interaction that they don't want to be part of.
Yeah.
That funny.
Yeah. There were a couple moments like that I thought were funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is hard. I mean, that grabbing somebody's boobs joke is going to be hard to get past for me today. Like, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
Really sets the tone for the film.
It does. It really does.
Yeah, it sadly does.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry I didn't like it better than I did.
It's sad. So, as is probably clear by how frustrated we're all huge Star Trek fans. So, let's head to 10 forward and talk about some stuff that we geek about Star Trek. I'm not sure how positive we'll be about the film, but at least we'll be talking about things that we like about the world in general. Mine is pretty quick. One of the things that I really unequivocally liked about this film is the design of the sets for engineering areas, docking bays, a lot of the kind of more industrial parts of spaceships. There's a whole lot of like support structures, metal support structures. There's big pipes running through, big tanks. The walls look like they're made of like concrete or something. They're very like rough and not finished. Often Star Trek sets are like polished plastic or metal looks, and these look very unfinished. And if you look up pictures of the equivalent spaces on aircraft carriers today, modern aircraft carriers, they're very similar. Like the hangar where the jets are kept on an aircraft carrier looks almost identical to the place where they like get on the shuttlecrafts to head to the Enterprise. It's
cool.
and the engine room of an aircraft carrier, another very large naval ship, is like a small version of that huge sprawling engine room of the Enterprise in the movie. And so I really like that, like, someone on the production went in and was like, what would these spaces look like? And I think just looked up inspirations and was like, oh, let's actually make this a realistic space where, like, you'd be able to access machinery without having to pull a panel off the wall. You know, make it look like it's built to be able to handle a ship coming in too fast and ramming into the wall. Like, it's really cool design.
Yeah, I liked it.
Also, really ambitious belief in a lack of railing.
For sure.
They really believed
God.
that their people were going to be so dexterous that they would not fall off of those catwalks. And I, as a very clumsy person, admire that ambition.
Yeah, like our contemporary military, they do not have an OSHA telling them how these structures must be built.
On the downside, quite a lot of people did fall off of those catwalks.
Well, you know, if you're making an omelet, you gotta have a few people get terrible injuries falling from a great height.
Yeah.
Well, so I did struggle a little bit. And usually this is the easy one for me, the one thing I geek about. But a thing that I really liked about this movie is the idea of having an alternate timeline. I think that lack of allegiance to, I guess, canon in that way, the willingness to just do, hey, what if we did a different timeline? I guess I don't love that it's a Vulcan genocide. That's the sort of the big, I don't know, event of it. But the idea that you're willing to do this spin-off timeline and things be different, I do like that. I like that they are willing to play in that space. In fact, I guess maybe it would have been, I think that maybe they could have pushed more into that space, been less beholden instead of more beholden to the events and the characters of the franchise. So I don't know if I have a ton else to say, because I don't know that it's really the best version of that alternate timeline idea, but I do think it's good that they thought, what if we did this?
Yeah, it's where they try to pull it back and tie it together is where you get kind of into that Destiny stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, it must end up with this friendship. It must end up with XYZ.
They could have had, like, Kirk end up as the pilot. I mean, that might have been too big of a difference, but, like, or I don't know, have Uhura be the first officer instead of Spock. Like, if you're going for different timeline things, have one of the crews secretly be a villain. I don't know. Like, there's all sorts of interesting stuff you could do with that.
And with less winking, I think. I think it's a little too winky.
Yeah. I did not like Into Darkness, which is the Khan remake. But one of the things that I liked about it is that, spoilers for a terrible movie, Khan isn't the villain of that film. He ends up villainous, but, like, he's not responsible for the initial events, I think, right? Like, I have no memory of it. There's another plot going. There's, like, a military conspiracy, I think, and Khan is scapegoated, but then takes advantage of it to become a villain. Like, it's not a retread of the original thing, and I think that that's cool. Oh yeah, because Khan hasn't been discovered, doesn't get discovered by the Enterprise, right? Like, that event changes. The Botany Bay doesn't get found in the same way.
Oh.
I think.
Yeah. And so I was thinking, like, what else goes on with this alternate timeline? I think that's where Star Trek Online is set.
I think you visit. Like, I think you can visit it or something. Yeah. Okay, so it's post Nemesis and post Romulus destruction, but I think still in the original timeline.
Okay.
Star Trek Online's weird.
That makes sense.
It does weird errors.
Yeah, it brings forth all the things that, like, several of the things that we've touched on and been like, oh, I wonder what the progenitors are like. I wonder what the Breen are doing. Like, they're all in Star Trek Online. They all had the same questions that we did, and they decided to just do it, I think. All right, so my little item is lens flares. So, okay. When Star Trek Discovery came out, and in its opening shots, there are lens flares. I was like, oh, I thought we all hated lens flares, especially in Star Trek, because the 2009 film did it so much and everyone sneered at Abrams, right? And then Abrams kind of, like, not fell off, but, like, I at least stopped watching his films. And everyone in the film space seemed to sneer at lens flares. And then it's just normal now. It's just in modern Star Trek, which I am continually surprised by. This movie had even more lens flares than I thought it did.
It was so bad to look at. It was so, like, I am not particularly visually sensitive.
Yeah.
This hurt to watch often.
Yeah.
I am visually sensitive, and there were parts I did not watch.
J.J. Abrams can use lens flares in a cool way. Fringe has plot-relevant lens flares. When you see lens flares in Fringe, it's because there's been, like, some sort of dimensional travel going on or some sort of reality distortion, and that's cool. And it's rather... he uses a rather light touch in there. This, like... just sometimes I couldn't see what was going on because of the camera shake and the lens flares.
And the tilting, all the tilting. So he did an interview in 2009 where he admitted that in Star Trek they were overdone. And he said, but what he said was interesting. He said, I love the idea that the future was so bright it couldn't be contained in the frame. The flares weren't just happening from on-camera light sources, they were happening off-camera. And that was really the key to it. I wanted to create the sense that, just off-camera, something spectacular is happening.
That's beautiful. I wish it had worked.
It's beautiful. I also wish it had worked. But I thought that was a really interesting, like, motivation for doing it. And it kind of fits with the kind of glitz and glam of all the sets and stuff like that anyway. But it makes me feel old, maybe, but I'm still surprised when I watch a modern Star Trek show and there are lens flares in it. Because I'm like, I thought we had all agreed this was bad, but apparently it has now receded to appropriate dramatic use instead of 3 times the scene.
Yeah,
so,
because we can...
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, we can basically avoid lens flares now. Like, camera and lens technology is advanced to the point where we don't have to have any lens flares. And so they become this visual shorthand for something too bright to represent on screen. And you generally used okay in Discovery, I think.
I was going to say the thing I am hearing is that because J.J. Abrams ran, we can take baby steps.
Yes.
Yes. And my understanding is that all the lens flares in Star Trek 2009 are real, practical. They're not CG.
Except for the ones in the CG scenes, presumably.
Fair, yes. But all of the ones that would involve cameras do involve cameras.
Wild. And
light sources. Yeah, it's a dedication and a design intent that is interesting.
Well, at the end of each episode, we pick the next scene we're watching based on a connection from this episode.
This was bad, so...
Honestly, I feel like we've been really edging around what I've chosen for maybe the whole run of our podcast. So I think it's finally time.
Okay, now I'm excited.
Okay, I know one of 2 things it could be. I know 2 things it could be.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
There's good and bad news, so don't get super excited. But a thing that I loved about this film, as I just talked about, is the fact that they said, what if we had an alternate timeline. But guess what? That's actually not a new idea in Star Trek. In fact, it's something they've been doing maybe in every series, or at least most series, has a alternate universe that we visit and have visited in many of the franchises. So we're gonna go to a alternate Star Trek episode, and actually we're gonna watch a pair of episodes that I don't think I've seen. It is possible that I have seen them, but I'm not sure. We're gonna watch 2 episodes that are In a Mirror Darkly, the 18th and 19th episodes of Enterprise Season 4.
Wow.
I knew it was going to be Enterprise.
I don't think I've seen these either. And they're generally, like, considered some of the better Enterprise episodes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, people who are Enterprise defenders say Season 4 is the best season. I am not sure. I feel like, I thought I had watched all of Enterprise. I am not sure I have seen some of these episodes in Season 4, so I am y'all know, but I'm a huge fan of the parallel universe. It's maybe my favorite shit in Star Trek. And so I'm pretty excited to see one that maybe I haven't seen. And I love the In a Mirror Darkly. That's a great title. So.
This is
It's a very good title.
2-parter?
It's a 2-parter. Okay. They also did mention how Scotty murdered Archer's dog.
Yeah, Scotty killed Archer's dog. Well,
Schrodinger's boxed him.
Yeah, let me back away from that a little bit. In the both a comic and the novelization, maybe, that Beagle conveniently shows up on the transporter pad of the Enterprise. So,
okay,
depending on what you consider canon, the dog is okay.
Yeah. Also, we don't know about this alternate timeline. We don't know what happened to that dog. But I assume we'll get to see the dog in these episodes. I feel like that dog's on all the time on Enterprise. So,
looking forward to it.
Yeah. And you can find Enterprise on Paramount or wherever you steal your Star Trek.
So next time we'll be discussing In a Mirror Darkly on Before the Future Came. You can find links to some of the stuff we talked about and other show notes at beforethefuture.space. And we also I'll probably include an image of a lens flare and a few other pictures. Maybe some weird guy, Scotty's little friend, I don't know. If you could, it would be really helpful for you to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts especially, or anywhere that you found the show that has ratings. And if you want to give us feedback, we would love it. We don't hear all that much from listeners, and we'd love to know what you like or want to see more of. You can give us questions on co-host at cohost.org/beforethefuturecame. You can comment on individual episodes on our website, or you can write us via email at onscreen@beforethefuture.space.
I'm Lucy Arnold and sometimes blog at intertextualities.com.
I'm Melissa Avery Weir, and I live at urson.net and on Mastodon as melissa@urson.life.
And I'm Gregory Avery Weir, and you can find me at ludusnovus.net or on cohost at cohost.org/GAW. Our theme music is Let's Pretend by Josh Woodward, used under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. See you next time.
I'm sure we'll all live happily ever after, surrounded by butterflies, children, and laughter. It's a fairy tale story, so let's just pretend. Hallelujah, amen, it's the end. Happily ever after the end.
Make sure not to cut this part into the episode.